Lately, many people have been wondering if we're really on the brink of a third world war. Years ago, we thought the war in Ukraine would end soon, but it's still going on. Israel is waging a war in Gaza, and now the United States is bombing Iran. Iran is bombing Dubai, Israel, and US bases. And, well, this isn't a geopolitics channel, this is a storytelling channel. And today we have a story about a man few people know but who is present, hidden, in the arms history of many of these countries. His name is Abdul-Qadir Khan, and in his prime he was one of the most important arms dealers in the Middle East. For 20 years, he illegally ran a network supplying materials for illegal weapons. But what set Khan apart was that the network he had created wasn't for conventional weapons. It was a network for nuclear weapons. He was a key figure in North Korea's development of its nuclear arsenal and did business with countries like Libya and Iran, a fact that is particularly relevant today. We're talking about a man who stole state secrets from European countries and who was, at the same time, a national hero in Pakistan, where he lived a life of luxury, throwing million-dollar weddings for his daughters and collecting vintage cars. His network operated through nuclear entrepreneurs, people involved in smuggling from countries all over the world. To take him down, the CIA had to mount a global operation in collaboration with Italy, Germany, and the United Kingdom, with agents infiltrating some of the factories Khan owned in Malaysia, while others operated from the United Arab Emirates, all in secret, flouting international laws. An operation that took place in a highly tense political environment, where Khan was a key figure in many of the conflicts in the Middle East. This is the story of Abdul-Qadir Khan, the Middle East's biggest nuclear arms trafficker. The story of Abdul-Qadir Khan, or Akka Khan, is a story marked by the conflicts in the region where he lived. He was born in 1936 in Bhopal, a city in British India that, in 1947, became part of India when the country was partitioned into India and Pakistan. Khan's family emigrated to the newly created Pakistan, and he was raised there. Between 1961 and 1972, he traveled and studied in Europe. He was a young man dedicated to academic life, studying at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, the Technical University of Berlin, and the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. By the end of that period, he held a degree in metallurgical engineering and a doctorate. Upon completing his university studies, which lasted a full decade, he secured a position at the Physical Dynamics Research Laboratory in Almelo, Netherlands. It was a laboratory specializing in advanced uranium enrichment processes. Khan's work involved optimizing uranium enrichment processes for nuclear energy. This is an important detail because enriching uranium for bombs is not the same as enriching it for a nuclear power plant. At the same time, far from the Netherlands, Pakistan's President, Ali Bhutto, had launched his nuclear program, in this case, to create bombs, but Pakistan was not succeeding. They put scientists to work on it, but nothing worked. They had no idea what to do. The problem with atomic bombs isn't making the bomb itself, that's no secret, everyone knows the theory. The secret lies in the industrial processes needed to obtain the materials, that is, the mechanisms for enriching uranium. When Khan was working at the Physical Dynamics Research Laboratory, he had no instructions or contact with Pakistan. He was a newly arrived employee, a mere novice. But as novice as he was, in 1974, he was asked to translate some classified documents regarding two German centrifuges, the G1 and the G2. They had asked him because he was one of the few people with enough knowledge to translate such a technical document, and they trusted his work so much that they let him make copies and even take them home. They had just given him classified documents on the centrifuges that made it possible to produce the enriched uranium that Pakistan desperately needed. You see, these centrifuges are the key to building an atomic bomb. As we explained in the video about the Israeli hackers, to build an atomic bomb you need uranium, but not just any uranium. Natural uranium won't work. Isotope 235, which is the most radioactive and unstable isotope of uranium, is present at only a 0.7% concentration in its natural state. For a nuclear power plant, a 5% concentration of this isotope is needed. For a nuclear bomb, a 90% concentration is needed. To reach that level, the uranium enrichment process must be carried out using high-speed centrifuges that separate the different uranium isotopes based on their weight. These machines capable of performing such feats are not easy to manufacture, and their blueprints are kept secret. The issue was that the centrifuge blueprints given to Khan were for models used to enrich uranium up to 5%, that is, for nuclear power plants. They were not suitable for reaching 90% enrichment and building an atomic bomb. Similarly, Khan provided Pakistan with those blueprints and information about the laboratory suppliers. And we know this because Europe wasn't about to let a Pakistani engineer work with critical information unsupervised either. Dutch intelligence had been monitoring him. When evidence of his actions came to light in late 1975, Khan fled back to his country. In Pakistan, the situation was dire. To begin with, the country had been suffering a string of defeats against India since the 1940s. In 1971, they had lost part of their territory, which is now Bangladesh. And when Khan arrived, India had just detonated an atomic bomb in a peaceful test called Smiling Buddha, which meant they were still losing to India and were inferior. In Pakistani society, that sense of pessimism and inferiority was palpable. To make matters worse, the laboratory where Khan began working was a complete mess. A laboratory of the PAEC, the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission. Long, tedious processes that, as they were currently set up, had no chance of figuring out how to build any kind of bomb. President Bhutto, then Prime Minister, in July 1976 allowed Khan to set up his own laboratory, with a single mission, to build the damn atomic bomb. In this way, they removed the bottleneck in the nuclear program's progress, and in 1978, Khan succeeded in developing his own centrifuges. The P1 design, as he called it, was based directly on the G1 model he had translated while working in the Netherlands. But this didn't solve everything, not by a long shot. Enriching uranium to 90% of the 235 isotope is extremely difficult. Each of Khan's machines would take about 3,000 years to produce the necessary amount of highly enriched uranium. Although, to tell the truth, he wasn't going to have just a single machine working. They could set up several in a cascade, passing the increasingly refined material from one to the next to reduce the time, but that was also very expensive. It is estimated that each centrifuge could cost around $200,000, and they needed thousands of them if they wanted to produce the bomb as soon as possible. A real challenge when you consider that Pakistan was not only emerging from a period of war but had also suffered a military coup in 1977 that had left General Ul Haq in power. In 1978, the United States passed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act, under which the US would take action if countries collaborating with it began using nuclear energy to manufacture weapons. Pakistan was among them. And Pakistan wasn't exactly subtle about it. In 1979, it was discovered that they had been placing orders with a Dutch company for more than 6,200 rotors for centrifuges. Dutch authorities asked the companies to reject the orders, but there was too much money at stake to do so, and no law required them to comply. The United States announced it would impose sanctions under the 1978 law, but it never actually did so. Pakistan was a key point for crossing into Afghanistan. Look where it is on the map. In Afghanistan, the Soviet Union had launched an attack during the Cold War, and without Pakistan, the United States could not intervene effectively. Instead of punishing them, they helped them strengthen their military and offered economic aid. Between 1980 and 1985, Khan continued working at his plant in Chutta, in his own laboratories, until he achieved his goal. By 1981, our plant in Chutta was already operational, Khan said. And in 1984, he told our then president, General Ul Haq, that we could detonate a nuclear bomb with a week's notice. Then Khan, who had been importing practically everything he needed to operate his centrifuge plant, began suspiciously increasing the orders he placed with other countries. He went so far as to double the number of components his laboratory actually required. Now that he knew how to build atomic bombs, it was time to set his network of nuclear secrets in motion. Khan was a man of exceptional qualities. He was multilingual, had knowledge of nuclear weapons, and judging by this photo, I'd say he also knew a thing or two about boxing. Besides that, he was also very good at finding people of any nationality or social background who were top-notch at what they did. In Europe, Khan built a network of specialists, known as nuclear entrepreneurs. To start with, around 1976, he contacted a friend he had met during his time at university, Henk Slevos, a Dutchman who was also a metallurgical engineer and who became his main contact for the supply of materials. During a conversation, Khan asked me if I could send products to Pakistan for a project he was working on, Slivos said. Since then and up to the present day, I have worked as a supplier of certain items within Khan's network. Slivos set up the front company Slivos Research BV, through which he sent the necessary materials to Khan, disguised as something else. It was laboratory equipment such as tubes, barometers and kilos of triethanolamine, generally material that was not necessarily intended for the development of uranium centrifuges. Khan began operating globally across 3 continents and several new members joined the team. There was a South African who acted as a distributor, responsible for certain specific components for handling uranium hexafluoride, a Swiss engineer who handled the valves, an Indian businessman who used his companies to promote Khan's P1 centrifuges, Gotthard Lurch, a German suspected of acting as a contact with Libya and Iran, and Buhari Shiat Ali Tahir from Sri Lanka, the Indian businessman's nephew and a key figure who managed certain financial aspects, concealed bank transfers and operated from tax havens or jurisdictions with lax nuclear regulations. He was the one who kept the supply chain secret and made deals without leaving a trace. He also used a front company called SMB Computers. Another key piece of this puzzle was in the United Kingdom. His name was Peter Griffin, yes, like the father in the family sitcom, but a little smarter. Peter Griffin was an engineer specializing in centrifuge technology and precision tools, an engineer and business shark who set up another front company in Dubai, GTI, Gulf Technical Industries. From there, they manufactured all manner of components needed for the Khan operation, whilst also serving as a logistics hub to receive products from all over the world and further obscure the trail of their activities. With the gang ready, Khan set the wheels in motion. Exports and components traveled from country to country in an intricate web. In Turkey, ETI Electrotechnic supplied the high-strength metal, aluminium, and generators. In South Africa, they obtained the vacuum equipment. They also worked with Singapore, Switzerland, and South Korea. They even used Spain as an intermediary with Libya. They sourced special furnaces from Italy, had a presence in France, the United Kingdom and Taiwan, and imported 3D measuring tools from Japan. Peter Griffin said of Khan's ambitions were immense. I asked him if he wanted to be president and he said, "Not even Rome, I just want to help make my country great." He also added, "If it's good for Pakistan, I'd buy it from the devil." In the late 1980s, Khan managed to replicate the German G2 centrifuge model. They branded the reborn G2S as the P2 model. These new centrifuges were between 2 and 3 times more powerful than their predecessors and allowed them to produce enough uranium to make around 3 to 6 nuclear bombs a year. The trick here was to harden the steel rotor using what's known as martensitic aging, a process that involves, do you really want me to explain this bit? Right, you take the steel at a high temperature and cool it down quickly. This creates a crystalline structure called martensite. But martensite is brittle. So you have to age it, which is simply a matter of heating it to a moderate temperature for a long time. After that, the steel is absolutely brilliant, and that's important because these centrifuges have to spin at supersonic speeds. That's why the Khan P2S were so powerful. Khan gave his services a facelift and devised a marketing strategy aimed at promoting the capabilities of the KRL laboratory. He made promotional videos and distributed posters featuring illustrations of mushroom clouds, using the opportunity to position himself as a central figure in the process. By 1983, it seemed that Khan was finally going to face some difficulties. The Dutch sentenced him to 4 years in prison for leaking the centrifuge blueprints, but as Khan was protected by the Pakistani authorities, nothing ever happened to him, and after 2 years the case was dismissed. As absurd as it may seem, this worked in Khan's favor because, rather than giving him bad press, Khan used the case to claim he was innocent and that was why he had been released. That all he had done was obtain information that had been publicly available for decades. Public information for which, surprise surprise, there were countries willing to pay him whatever he asked. Khan simply had to name a price for his services and they would accept it. Khan was rich, an eccentric millionaire who built a hotel in Timbuktu named after his wife, Endrina Khan, who owned 4 luxury homes in Islamabad, a property firm in London that gifted a house to a fortune teller who used to read his palm, and who organized lavish weddings for his 2 daughters. Despite the complexity of the whole operation, the Pakistani state pretended to know nothing of this income or its source. There is much speculation about what the state did and did not know. To begin with, given the amount of money he earned officially and what he actually earned, there should have been some suspicion. But apparently, Khan also held a check guaranteeing him virtually unlimited funding to work on matters related to nuclear technology, as well as access to cargo planes and a special pass allowing him to bypass customs procedures for any goods he imported or exported. A year later, it was suspected that Iran had received components to manufacture centrifuges from Pakistan, and at the same time it was also believed that some Iranian scientists had received nuclear training at the laboratories in Cannes. Because of this, Iran became embroiled in some international controversies. The country's leaders claimed that their sole aim was to build an energy industry, but apparently no one believed them, as Europe refused all their requests for the necessary parts. Following this refusal, a secret meeting took place in Dubai between Iran and the Khan network. A few years later, researchers discovered a sheet of paper that had been part of that meeting. It was a handwritten note, and they were able to identify one of the letters in the note as the Khan letter. The note contained a list of over 2,000 centrifuges and all the materials Iran would need. The Khan laboratory facilities had gained a great deal of prestige. It now housed a school, hospitals, genetic engineering laboratories and sports stadiums. In 1992, Pakistan began collaborating with North Korea for military and economic interests. Very little is known about this collaboration, but it is known that Khan made at least 13 semi-official visits to the country. Pakistan, according to its own statements, was unaware of the existence of Khan nuclear network. The scientists' constant trips must have aroused some suspicion as to what he was actually doing. But they did not, because, once again, luck was on Khan's side. Pakistan was suffering a severe crisis and the state coffers had run dry. There was a huge risk of default, meaning they would be unable to pay the investors financing their debt. This included ordinary people, but also other countries. In a country like Pakistan, a default is more likely to occur than in others, but if it does happen, it generates a tremendous wave of mistrust. In this context, Pakistan was probably keen for Khan activities with Korea to continue because they provided money, and Pakistan needed money. In 1997, the network secured a new client, Libya. In 1998, India detonated 5 nuclear bombs. And Khan, in line with that assertion that the atomic bomb could be detonated with a week's notice, became a reality. Pakistan's response was to detonate 5 more bombs in the so-called Shagai-1 test. 2 days later, they detonated another, bringing the total to 6 in the Shagai-2 test. With this, Pakistan positioned itself, if not above India, then at least as an equally capable rival. Khan gained even more prestige at a national level. But beware, that prestige had caught the attention of a group of people whose hobby is dismantling nuclear secrets trafficking networks. On the other side of the world, sitting at a round table at the CIA, were Jim Lawler and the agents with the code names Lady of the Lake, Sir Lancelot and Galahad. Operation Excalibur was on the verge of dismantling the nuclear trafficking network run by metallurgical engineer Abdulkader Khan. The operation was named Excalibur because Khan had been searching for the atomic bomb as if it were the Holy Grail. Continuing with the Arthurian metaphors, the agents were given names in keeping with the theme. Galahad, the man in charge of investigating the front companies. The Lady of the Lake, the IT expert. Sir Lancelot, the Cuban spy who had infiltrated Khan's network. At the helm was Lola, although we do not know his code name. We do know that he had previously spied on traffickers of weapons of mass destruction operating in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, and that he worked with clients in Iran, Libya, and Syria. The operation had already been active for a few years and had mapped out a large part of the network. In December 2000, they set up base in Dubai and turned the place into the nerve center of the entire operation. In Dubai, regulations are minimal, there are plenty of ports and ships, and most importantly, it is often a common refuge for traffickers or middlemen dealing in illegal goods. Shortly before, the CIA had bribed the Tyner family, who were staunch collaborators of Khan. To ensure the collaboration with the Tyners worked, the CIA had tapped their phones and hacked into Swiss banks to monitor their finances. At the opportune moment, Lola offered them a contract worth $1 million and they accepted, joining the Arthurian team. In exchange for the money, the Tyners agreed to provide them with information. Later, Khan, unaware of any of this, set up a new factory in Kuala Lumpur with the Tyners. In the new factory, thanks to the Tyners, they planted a CIA mole who spoke Malay and who was busy planting microphones, bugging cameras and installing backdoors in the computers. Whilst all this was happening, Pakistan hosted the country's first international arms exhibition. KRL had its own stand with a section dedicated to nuclear energy-related products. There, it guaranteed that everything on display was approved for export. In early 2001, the CIA was still trying to confirm who Khan's clients were. By that time, the network had already worked with Iran, and there were strong suspicions that North Korea was also a client. But the most important client was Muammar Gaddafi, the dictator of Libya. Gaddafi had placed a massive order for Khan's new P2 centrifuges. That was what was going to bring down Khan's network. All they had to do was continue gathering intelligence from the factory in Kuala Lumpur. But it wasn't going to be that simple. The CIA found itself between a rock and a hard place. Libya was on the verge of acquiring an atomic bomb. It was about to succeed. The United States did not want this to happen under any circumstances, and the only way to prevent it was to shut down the factory in Malaysia from which they were obtaining their intelligence. It wasn't all bad news. Operation Excalibur received intelligence regarding North Korea. A Pakistani agent provided them with a document confirming that Khan's network had supplied the country with nuclear centrifuges, which meant they had breached the 1994 agreement obliging them to halt weapons development and which gave the CIA a new lead to pursue. Although they presented the evidence, North Korea ignored it, withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and, years later, in 2006, carried out its first nuclear test. The situation with Libya, on the other hand, practically resolved itself. In the end, it was not necessary to raid the factory. Libya was attempting to negotiate the lifting of international sanctions that had been in place for over 30 years. As part of the negotiations, Libya had to admit to the existence of its weapons of mass destruction programs and dismantle them of its own accord. If it did so, the sanctions would be lifted. But if evidence was found that Libya was developing or acquiring nuclear weapons and failed to acknowledge or halt such activities, the sanctions could be tightened. The country had no idea that Operation Excalibur had them under surveillance. Thanks to the factory, Lauer's team located a German vessel named BBC China that had just left Dubai. The ship was carrying hundreds of kilos of centrifuge components, specifically around 1 million parts for the P1 and P2 models from Cannes. The ship was due to pass through the Suez Canal and head for Tripoli, the capital of Libya. Upon learning this, the CIA immediately contacted Germany, the UK, and Italy. The aim was to intercept the ship on the high seas and force it to dock at the port of Taranto, near a NATO base. They had to do this in complete secrecy, which meant they would have to break a few laws, but breaking the laws of other countries is all in a day's work for the CIA. Over the weekend, they mobilized an Italian naval destroyer armed with a 5-inch gun, ready to rendezvous with the German vessel on the high seas. The BBC reported that the China had refused to change course when asked to do so. It claimed it was in international waters and therefore under no obligation to obey any orders. The captain resisted until he was threatened with being barred from docking at US ports, which would have cost him 80% of his customers. The ship then docked, and thousands of nuclear centrifuge parts destined for Libya were found on board. Faced with such evidence, the Libyan government had no choice but to admit the existence of the nuclear program and dismantle it. In 2003, they published an official confession stating that they had paid Khan over $100 million. The discovery of the ship bound for Libya did not end there. They asked Pakistan to put an irreversible stop to Khan and his activities. After receiving the evidence from the United States, the president of Pakistan, Ben Musharraf, said he knew nothing of the matter and expressed outrage. "I'll kill that son of a bitch," he said. First, Khan was allegedly sidelined, and later, in 2004, he appeared on television to make a public confession. On the 4th of February 2004, Khan appeared on television to confess his crimes and said, "My dear brothers and sisters, I have chosen to appear before you all to offer my most sincere apologies to a traumatized nation." And he added, to make it clear, there has never been any authorization whatsoever for these activities from the government. And now it was time to pay the price, wasn't it? Put him behind bars, perhaps. In prison? Well, it seems not, because they did nothing. Less than 24 hours later, Khan received a pardon from President Musharraf. And this happened, possibly, because Khan was a national hero, a symbol of Pakistani pride, who had played a very important card and was seen by many as the man who had stood up to India with the 1998 tests. Putting him in prison would have called the country's nuclear program into question and would have undermined some of the renewed confidence felt by the people after years of feeling inferior to India. On the other hand, they couldn't let Khan go unpunished either, so they placed him under house arrest. Musharraf's pardon spared Khan from having to stand trial or give explanations for what he had done. Many other countries tried to secure Khan's extradition to try him on their own soil, arguing that his statements had been made solely to spare Pakistan trouble. But Pakistan turned a deaf ear. Khan was beyond everyone's reach. House arrest is probably not so bad when you live in a huge mansion. It remained in place for 5 years. In 2009, although it continued, it was under more lenient conditions. Khan, who was already 72, was allowed to visit Karachi, where he had some friends. They also made it much easier for him to travel in general. When some reporters asked him about details of his nuclear network, his confinement, or related matters, Khan said he was under no obligation to answer for anything and that he would always be proud of what he had done for Pakistan. 3 years later, in 2012, Khan reappeared in public with a new proposal. He wanted to enter the political arena. Many Pakistanis were frustrated by the constant cuts being made by their government as well as by their dependence on the United States. Perhaps, if someone whom many saw as a hero were to step in, things would change. He presented his party, which, incidentally, had a nuclear missile as its symbol, and said, "I want to bring about real change and help the people of Pakistan, just as I did back in 1974, when India launched its nuclear bombs. Today, once again, my country needs me." A year later, he failed and dissolved his party. He continued his life away from the media and, in 2021, passed away at the age of 85 after being hospitalized with COVID-19. AQ Khan's nuclear network enabled 3 countries to acquire materials for nuclear weapons. It operated for almost 20 years without anyone knowing, and had hardly any consequences for its creator. It is true that there is also information suggesting that the network was much larger than it appeared, and there are suspicions that Khan also made offers to Syria, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. There was also a deal with Iraq under which the country obtained some blueprints for centrifuges. The other members of Khan's nuclear network did not face severe punishment either, and the authorities were extremely lenient with all of them. The person who spent the longest time in prison served 7 years and was convicted of forging documents. In other words, it was by no means the most serious charge.